Imagine standing on a shoreline at night, waves breaking softly against the rocks, while somewhere beneath the surface of the ocean a creature swims that should not exist, not because it is dangerous or alien, but because according to everything we thought we knew, it should have vanished tens of millions of years ago. Extinction is supposed to be final, a full stop in the story of life. And yet, here it is, alive, breathing, moving through the world as if time itself had simply passed it by. This is where our journey begins, in the unsettling space between what science expects and what nature stubbornly refuses to obey. For most of human history, extinction was an abstract idea. Species disappeared from local landscapes, but the concept that entire forms of life could vanish forever was difficult to grasp. Fossils were once interpreted as the remains of mythical beasts or failed experiments of creation. Only in the last few centuries did scientists begin to understand extinction as a fundamental force shaping life on Earth. And once that understanding emerged, it brought with it a comforting sense of order. Species appear, evolve, adapt, and eventually disappear. A clean, logical progression written into the fossil record, until certain creatures refused to follow the script. The term living fossil is itself misleading, yet irresistibly powerful. It suggests a contradiction, something that is both alive and frozen in time. These organisms are not literally unchanged, but they exhibit a remarkable continuity of form and function over geological timescales, hundreds of millions of years, long before dinosaurs walked the land, long before mammals rose to dominance, long before humans ever existed to question their presence, and still they persist. Take the coelacanth. For decades, it existed only in stone. Fossils dated it back over 400 million years, yet the youngest remains were believed to be about 65 million years old, disappearing alongside the dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous period. In textbooks, it was classified as extinct, a transitional species, important for understanding the evolution of vertebrates, especially the move from sea to land, a relic of the past. Then, in 1938, a fishing trawler off the coast of South Africa hauled something up from the deep that rewrote biological history overnight. The fish was massive, armored in thick scales, with fleshy, limb-like fins unlike those of modern fish. It looked prehistoric because it was prehistoric, alive. The discovery shocked the scientific community, not just because a species thought extinct was still living, but because it appeared astonishingly similar to its ancient fossilized ancestors. Millions of years of catastrophic change had come and gone, and yet this creature remained lurking in deep waters, unseen, unchanged in any obvious way. This was not an isolated anomaly. Horseshoe crabs, or limulae, have roamed Earth's shallow seas for more than 450 million years. They survived the Permian extinction, the most devastating mass extinction event in Earth's history, which wiped out an estimated 90% of marine species. They survived asteroid impacts, climate collapses, oxygen crashes, and the constant rearrangement of continents. Their basic body plan, with its dome carapace and spiked tail, remains so consistent that fossils from hundreds of millions of years ago are instantly recognizable as the same creature crawling along beaches today. How is this possible? How do some organisms endure while countless others vanish forever? The question challenges not only our understanding of extinction, but also our assumptions about evolution itself. If evolution is driven by constant change and adaptation, why do some species appear to stand still while the world transforms around them? The answer begins with a critical distinction that is often overlooked. Evolution does not require visible change. It requires successful reproduction. If an organism is already well adapted to its environment, there may be little selective pressure to alter its form. Stability, not innovation, can become the winning strategy. For living fossils, their environments often change very little over immense spans of time, or they occupy ecological niches so specialized and isolated that disruption rarely reaches them. Deep sea habitats are a prime example. The coelacanth lives hundreds of meters below the surface, in cold, dark waters with stable temperatures and limited competition. While surface ecosystems are repeatedly reshaped by climate shifts and mass extinctions, the deep ocean remains comparatively constant. When disaster strikes above, these depths can function as biological refuges, preserving lineages that would otherwise be erased. But environmental stability alone does not tell the whole story. There is something deeply intriguing about the biology of these organisms themselves. Living fossils often possess traits that make them extraordinarily resilient. Slow metabolisms, long lifespans, low reproductive rates paired with high survival efficiency. These are not creatures racing through life, they are enduring it. The coelacanth, for instance, grows slowly and can live for decades. Its movements are deliberate, conserving energy in an environment where food is scarce. Horseshoe crabs possess immune systems so robust that their blood is used today to detect bacterial contamination in medical equipment. A defense mechanism honed not over thousands of years, but over hundreds of millions. Then there is the genetic dimension. When scientists sequenced the genome of the coelacanth, they found something surprising. Its DNA evolves more slowly than that of many other vertebrates. This does not mean it stops evolving, but the rate of genetic change is reduced. Fewer mutations accumulate over time, preserving ancient genetic structures that have already proven successful. Evolution, in this context, becomes conservative rather than experimental. This slow pace of genetic change may be a key factor in long-term survival. Rapid evolution can be advantageous in dynamic environments, but it also carries risk. Each change is a gamble. Living fossils appear to have avoided unnecessary bets. Their genomes reflect a strategy of refinement rather than reinvention, maintaining core biological systems that work exceptionally well. Yet this raises an uncomfortable implication. If some species can persist for hundreds of millions of years with minimal change, then extinction is not simply the inevitable outcome of time. It is selective, contingent, shaped by specific vulnerabilities rather than a universal decay. This challenges the simplistic idea that evolution is a linear march toward complexity or superiority. In fact, many living fossils are not primitive failures of evolution, but highly optimized survivors. Horseshoe crabs are not stuck in the past. They are perfectly tuned to a way of life that has remained viable across unimaginable spans of time. The same can be said for sharks, nautiluses, ginkgo trees, and crocodilians. Each represents a lineage that found a successful solution early and held onto it. Mass extinctions, often portrayed as total resets of life on Earth, are more selective than they appear. They do not wipe the slate clean. They filter. They eliminate species with certain traits while sparing others. Organisms with broad tolerances, flexible diets, resistant physiologies, or access to refuges are more likely to endure. Living fossils may simply be the visible survivors of these brutal filters. But survival is not the same as dominance. Many of these organisms exist today in limited numbers, confined to shrinking habitats. Their persistence does not mean invulnerability. In fact, what protected them from ancient catastrophes may not protect them from modern ones. Rapid climate change, habitat destruction, pollution, and overexploitation operate on timescales far faster than anything these species have previously faced. There is a tragic irony here. Creatures that survive asteroid impacts and global ecological collapse now struggle against fishing nets, coastal development, and industrial contamination. The horseshoe crab, whose lineage predates the dinosaurs, is harvested in large numbers for biomedical use. The coelacanth, once thought immortal in evolutionary terms, is critically endangered. This forces us to confront a deeper question. Are living fossils truly anomalies, or are they reminders of something we have forgotten? Perhaps extinction is not the default fate of life, but the consequence of specific disruptions that overwhelm even the most resilient systems. Perhaps stability, not change, has been underestimated as a survival strategy. When we look at the fossil record, we often focus on disappearance, but persistence is equally important. Every living fossil represents not a failure to evolve, but a success at surviving. Their existence tells us that evolution does not always reward novelty. Sometimes it rewards patience. And yet, mystery remains. There are still gaps in our understanding. Why do some lineages remain stable while closely related ones vanish? Why do certain body plans persist almost unchanged while others fragment into endless diversity? The answers likely lie in a complex interplay of genetics, ecology, chance, and time. Factors we are only beginning to untangle. As we continue to explore the depths of the oceans and the remote corners of the planet, new surprises may still await us. Species we assume are long gone may yet be hiding in the shadows, surviving quietly while we tell ourselves their stories have ended. The history of life is not finished. It is layered, recursive, and far stranger than a simple timeline suggests. Living fossils force us to rethink extinction, evolution, and even our place in the story of life. They whisper a humbling truth. The world does not evolve for our convenience or according to our expectations. It evolves according to survival. And sometimes survival looks exactly like waiting. To truly understand why living fossils persist, we must step away from dramatic images of sudden catastrophes and look instead at the quiet, invisible mechanisms that operate over immense spans of time. Extinction rarely happens in a single moment. Even mass extinctions unfold through chains of stress. Temperature shifts, oxygen depletion, food web collapse, acidification of oceans, loss of habitat. Survival, then, is often determined not by strength or speed, but by tolerance, the ability to endure conditions that others cannot. Many living fossils possess an extraordinary physiological tolerance. Horseshoe crabs, for example, can survive in waters with wildly fluctuating salinity and oxygen levels. Their ancient blue blood, rich in copper-based hemocyanin, functions efficiently in low-oxygen environments, where other species would suffocate. This trait alone may have allowed them to persist through periods when entire marine ecosystems collapsed due to anoxia. The same principle applies to organisms like lungfish, which can survive droughts by burrowing into mud and entering a state of suspended animation. Fossils show that lungfish have existed for over 400 million years, enduring continental drift, ice ages, and mass extinctions by simply waiting. While other species depended on constant environmental stability, lungfish adapted to instability itself. Survival was not about domination, but about endurance. Another crucial factor is ecological specialization. At first glance, specialization seems dangerous. A species tied to a narrow niche should be more vulnerable to change. Yet in some cases, extreme specialization provides insulation rather than exposure. When a species occupies a niche that few others can exploit, competition remains low and evolutionary pressure stabilizes. The coelacanth's deep-sea habitat is a perfect example. Few predators, few competitors, limited environmental fluctuation. While surface ecosystems were repeatedly reshaped, the coelacanth's world remained largely untouched. In evolutionary terms, it was hiding in plain sight, protected not by armor or aggression, but by obscurity. This brings us to a counterintuitive idea. Extinction is often driven not by weakness, but by success. Dominant species frequently specialize around abundant resources. When those resources vanish, dominance becomes a liability. Living fossils, by contrast, often occupy marginal spaces. They are not at the center of ecological networks, but at their edges. When the network collapses, the edges may remain. Consider sharks, often portrayed as apex predators, unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. Sharks are not truly static, but their core design has endured. Cartilaginous skeletons, replaceable teeth, efficient sensory systems. These traits evolved early and proved adaptable across countless marine environments. When mass extinctions wiped out dominant marine reptiles, sharks endured not because they were superior, but because they were flexible. Flexibility, however, does not always mean visible change. It can exist at the molecular level. Subtle genetic regulation, redundancy in biological systems, and robust developmental pathways can allow organisms to withstand stress without altering their outward appearance. This is where modern genetics has begun to reshape our understanding of living fossils. Genomic studies reveal that many so-called living fossils are not genetically frozen. They continue to evolve, but in ways that are not immediately obvious. Changes occur in regulatory genes, metabolic pathways, immune responses. The skeleton may look the same, but the underlying biology adapts quietly. Evolution, in this sense, becomes stealthy. This distinction is critical. The fossil record preserves hard structures, not soft tissues, not proteins, not gene expression patterns. When we say a species looks unchanged, we are comparing shapes, not functions. It is entirely possible for an organism to remain morphologically stable while undergoing significant physiological evolution. Living fossils may not be static at all. They may simply be evolving in ways we are not accustomed to seeing. Then there is the role of chance. Evolutionary survival is not purely deterministic. Timing matters, location matters, random events matter. A species that happens to occupy a refuge when catastrophe strikes may survive regardless of its intrinsic superiority. Another, equally well adapted, may vanish simply because it was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mass extinctions magnify the role of chance. When environments collapse rapidly, selection becomes brutal and imprecise. Traits that were advantageous for millions of years can become fatal liabilities overnight. In such moments, survival may hinge on accidental protection rather than optimal design. Living fossils may represent not only resilience but extraordinary luck. This realization undermines the comforting narrative that evolution always favors the best organisms. Instead, it reveals a history shaped by contingency. Life survives not because it is perfect, but because it is persistent. Because sometimes it endures long enough for the storm to pass. Plants offer some of the most striking examples of this principle. The ginkgo tree, often called a living fossil, has existed for over 200 million years. Fossilized ginkgo leaves are nearly identical to those found today in city parks. The species survived ice ages and mass extinctions by retreating to refuges, particularly in what is now China. Human cultivation later rescued it from near extinction, creating an unusual partnership between ancient biology and modern civilization. The ginkgo's resilience lies in its chemical defenses and resistance to pollution, disease, and radiation. In Hiroshima, ginkgo trees were among the first plants to resprout after the atomic bombing. A lineage that survived the age of dinosaurs also survived nuclear devastation. This is not stagnation. This is survival refined to an extreme. What these examples collectively suggest is that evolution is not a single narrative, but many overlapping ones. Rapid diversification, slow persistence, explosive innovation, quiet endurance. Living fossils occupy a narrative that we tend to ignore because it lacks drama. There is no sudden transformation, no obvious triumph, just continuity. And continuity over geological time is astonishing. Yet this continuity creates discomfort. It challenges the idea that evolution is always progressive. It complicates the assumption that complexity inevitably increases. Some of the most enduring organisms are relatively simple, not because complexity is bad, but because simplicity can be robust. This has implications beyond biology. It forces us to reconsider how we define success. In human terms, progress often means growth, expansion, acceleration. In evolutionary terms, progress may mean persistence, the ability to exist tomorrow as you existed today. But there is a darker side to this story. Living fossils expose a vulnerability in our current era. Never before has the planet experienced changes as rapid as those driven by human activity. Climate shifts that once unfolded over tens of thousands of years are now happening in centuries or decades. Ocean acidification, temperature rise, habitat fragmentation, pollution. These changes operate on timescales that even the most resilient lineages may not be able to match. The very traits that once protected living fossils may now endanger them. Slow reproduction, limited genetic variation, specialized habitats. These are strengths in stable environments, weaknesses in rapidly changing ones. The biological patience that allowed survival through past catastrophes may fail in the face of modern acceleration. This raises a haunting question. Are living fossils nearing the end of their long wait? Have they finally encountered a force they cannot outlast? In this sense, living fossils are not just biological curiosities. They are measuring sticks. The decline signals a level of disruption unprecedented in Earth's history. When organisms that survived asteroid impacts begin to disappear, something fundamental has shifted. And yet, there is also a lesson here. If some forms of life can endure for hundreds of millions of years, then extinction is not inevitable. It is conditional, preventable. The story of living fossils suggests that survival is possible when environments remain within certain bounds. The tragedy is not that extinction exists, but that we may be accelerating it beyond recovery. As we uncover more about the biology of these ancient survivors, we are not just learning about the past. We are learning about limits, about thresholds, about how much change life can tolerate before persistence becomes impossible. The mystery of living fossils, then, is not merely how they survived before, it is whether they can survive us. And that question leads us deeper into the hidden patterns of extinction itself. Patterns that suggest mass extinctions are not anomalies, but recurring features of Earth's history, events that reset life again and again, each time leaving behind a small number of survivors who redefine what comes next. In the next part of this journey, we will explore those patterns. We will examine the great die-offs of the past, the survivors that shaped the future, and the unsettling parallels between ancient catastrophes and the world we are creating today. Because to understand why living fossils exist, we must confront the cycles of destruction that made their survival so improbable. To grasp the true significance of living fossils, we must confront the scale of destruction they have survived. Earth's history is punctuated by moments when life nearly failed altogether. These were not minor setbacks, but global catastrophes that reshaped the biosphere from its foundations. 5 major mass extinctions are formally recognized, though many scientists argue there were more. Each one erased vast portions of life, yet none succeeded in wiping the planet clean. Something always remained. The most devastating of all occurred around 252 million years ago, the Permian-Triassic extinction event. It annihilated over 90% of marine species and around 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. Forests collapsed, coral reefs vanished, entire evolutionary lineages were erased forever. For millions of years afterward, the planet was dominated by microbial life, with complex ecosystems struggling to re-emerge. This was not a single asteroid strike, but a prolonged nightmare likely driven by massive volcanic eruptions, runaway greenhouse warming, ocean acidification, and widespread anoxia. And yet even then, some organisms survived. Among them were early ancestors of lineages that still exist today. Primitive reptiles that would eventually give rise to turtles and crocodilians. Early cartilaginous fish related to modern sharks. Hardy invertebrates capable of tolerating low oxygen and extreme temperatures. These survivors did not thrive immediately. They endured. For millions of years, they lived in a world stripped of complexity, waiting for conditions to stabilize. This pattern repeats across extinction events. At the end of the Devonian period, many reef-building organisms disappeared, but horseshoe crab ancestors persisted. During the Triassic-Jurassic extinction, which paved the way for dinosaurs, early crocodile relatives survived while countless competitors vanished. At the end of the Cretaceous, when an asteroid impact ended the reign of dinosaurs, mammals, birds, crocodilians, sharks, and coelacanths endured. What distinguishes these survivors is not dominance, but resilience to collapse. They are not necessarily the fastest, largest, or most intelligent. They are the ones capable of enduring prolonged scarcity, physiological stress, and ecological simplicity. After each mass extinction, life does not rebound immediately. There is a long, silent interval known as the survival phase. Ecosystems are unstable. Food webs are truncated. Evolution slows, not accelerates. During these phases, organisms with low energy demands, broad tolerances, and flexible behaviors hold the advantage. Living fossils are products of these survival phases, not the periods of explosive diversification that follow. This reframes their existence. They are not evolutionary leftovers, accidentally preserved. They are veterans of repeated planetary crises. Their bodies are archives of survival strategies that worked when the world was at its worst. Consider crocodilians. Often dismissed as primitive or unchanged, they are in fact masterpieces of physiological efficiency. Their cardiovascular systems allow them to survive long periods without oxygen. Their metabolism can slow dramatically. Their immune systems are unusually effective. These traits allowed them to survive mass extinctions that eliminated their more specialized relatives, including many ancient crocodile-like species that were far more diverse than those alive today. In this sense, living fossils are not anomalies. They are filters made flesh. Each mass extinction narrowed life down to a subset capable of enduring extreme stress. Those survivors then shaped the future, not through innovation, but through persistence. But here is where the story becomes unsettling. When scientists analyze extinction patterns, they notice something disturbing. The environmental conditions associated with past mass extinctions resemble trends we see emerging today: rapid carbon release, global temperature spikes, ocean acidification, oxygen loss in marine environments, habitat fragmentation. These were not unique to the distant past. They are recurring features of planetary crisis. The difference is speed. Past extinctions unfolded over thousands to hundreds of thousands of years. The changes we are witnessing now are happening in centuries. From an evolutionary perspective, this is instantaneous. Even the most resilient organisms evolve to endure slow catastrophe, not rapid transformation. Living fossils, adapted to wait out disasters, may find themselves unable to do so this time. Their survival strategies assume that conditions will eventually stabilize. But what if they do not? What if the disturbance becomes permanent? This is not speculation. We are already seeing it. Horseshoe crab populations are declining sharply due to habitat loss, overharvesting, and pollution. Sharks, survivors of multiple mass extinctions, are disappearing due to overfishing at rates unmatched in their evolutionary history. Coelacanth populations are small and fragile, threatened by deep-sea fishing and habitat disruption. The implication is profound. The traits that allowed these organisms to survive Earth's worst natural disasters may be insufficient against a single technologically driven species. This realization forces a re-evaluation of the concept of extinction itself. Extinction is not merely the end of a lineage, it is the erasure of information. Each living fossil carries genetic and physiological knowledge accumulated over hundreds of millions of years. When such a lineage disappears, an entire library of survival strategies vanishes with it. In this light, living fossils are not curiosities. They are irreplaceable records of life's ability to persist against overwhelming odds. Their loss would not simply reduce biodiversity, it would sever our connection to deep evolutionary time. There is also a philosophical dimension to this. Humans tend to see themselves as separate from natural history, as observers rather than participants. Living fossils undermine that illusion. They remind us that we are newcomers in a world shaped by cycles far older than our civilizations. They have outlasted ice ages, supervolcanoes, and asteroid impacts. Their continued existence places our current moment into a much larger context. And yet, that context is precisely what makes the present moment so alarming. If organisms that survived global annihilation are now struggling, then the scale of disruption must be extraordinary. It suggests that we are not merely altering ecosystems, but compressing evolutionary time. We are forcing changes faster than life can respond. This brings us back to the core mystery. Why did these organisms survive when so many others vanished? And what does their survival tell us about the future? The answer may be that living fossils are not defying extinction. They are revealing its rules. Extinction is not random, but patterned. It favors certain traits, certain strategies, certain tempos of life. When those patterns are disrupted, survival becomes uncertain for everyone. We often imagine evolution as a ladder, climbing toward complexity. Living fossils suggest a different metaphor, a landscape of peaks and refuges. Some lineages climb high and fall hard. Others settle into protected valleys and endure. Neither strategy is inherently superior. Both are shaped by circumstance. But now, the landscape itself is changing. As climates shift and oceans warm, refugees disappear. Deep sea environments are warming. Coastal ecosystems are collapsing. The quiet spaces where living fossils hid for millions of years are no longer insulated. There may be nowhere left to wait, and this leads to the most unsettling thought of all. Living fossils may not be relics of the past. They may be warnings from it, warnings that extinction is not always sudden, that survival is fragile, that resilience has limits, and that once those limits are crossed, even the most ancient lineages can vanish with shocking speed. In the final part of this exploration, we will bring these threads together. We will examine what living fossils ultimately reveal about life, time, and our responsibility within this story. Because the question is no longer just how they survived before. It is whether understanding them can help prevent the next great erasure. At this point, the question is no longer whether living fossils exist or even how they survived. The deeper question is what their survival means now. Because when we look closely at these ancient organisms, we are not just observing biology. We are observing time itself made visible. Living fossils are not anomalies frozen in amber. They are witnesses. They have watched the planet change in ways we can barely comprehend, and their continued existence forces us to confront a truth that is both humbling and unsettling. Life does not owe us permanence. For hundreds of millions of years, Earth has operated according to rhythms far slower than human history. Continents drifted, oceans opened and closed, atmospheres thickened and thinned. Entire worlds of life rose and collapsed. Through all of this, living fossils endured not by resisting change, but by remaining compatible with it. They did not dominate the planet. They simply fit within it, even when it became hostile. This is perhaps their most misunderstood lesson. Survival is not about control, it is about alignment. Modern civilization is built on the opposite assumption. We reshape environments to suit our needs, compress time, accelerate processes, and extract resources faster than ecosystems can recover. For a while, this works. Dominance can masquerade as stability. But evolution tells a different story. Dominance is often temporary. Persistence is rare. Living fossils embody persistence. They remind us that success measured in centuries is meaningless in evolutionary terms. The dinosaurs dominated for over 160 million years and vanished. Horseshoe crabs never dominated anything, and they are still here. The coelacanth never ruled the oceans, and yet it survived when marine empires collapsed. These creatures challenge our intuition about progress. They suggest that being advanced is not the same as being durable. There is a quiet irony in how we describe them. We call them fossils, as if they belong to the past, but in truth they are more connected to the future than most species. Their existence proves that long-term survival is possible. Not guaranteed, but possible. They are living counter-arguments to the idea that extinction is inevitable. And yet, their current struggle reveals something unprecedented. Never before has a single species altered the planet so rapidly, so globally, and so irreversibly. The changes driving today's biodiversity loss are not localized or cyclical. They are systemic. Climate systems are shifting simultaneously. Oceans are warming and acidifying. Habitats are fragmenting faster than species can migrate. These are not challenges life has encountered before at this speed. Living fossils evolved to survive catastrophe, but catastrophe used to come with recovery. What we are creating is not a temporary disturbance, it is a new baseline. This distinction matters. Evolution can work with gradual change and even with sudden shocks, provided there is time afterward to adapt. But when pressure becomes constant, when instability never ends, even the most resilient strategies fail. Waiting only works if the storm eventually passes. The danger is not that living fossils are fragile. The danger is that we are removing the conditions that make endurance meaningful, and this is where their story becomes a mirror. Humans often see themselves as separate from nature, protected by technology and culture. But biologically, we are no different from any other species. We are subject to the same constraints. We require stable climates, functioning ecosystems, predictable cycles. Our apparent immunity to extinction is an illusion created by short-time horizons. Living fossils remind us how short those horizons are. They have seen dominant species rise and fall again and again. Entire lineages that once seemed permanent vanished without leaving descendants. From their perspective, humans are not exceptional. We are brief. This does not mean extinction is inevitable for us, but it does mean that survival will not be negotiated on our terms. It will be determined by compatibility with the systems we depend on, the same systems that sustained life long before we arrived. There is also a profound ethical dimension here. Living fossils carry genetic information that cannot be recreated. Once lost, it is gone forever. They are not replaceable by technology, cloning, or conservation substitutes. Each lineage represents a unique solution to survival that has already passed every test Earth could impose. To allow such lineages to vanish due to negligence or short-term gain is not merely a loss of biodiversity. It is a failure of responsibility across time. Because for the first time in Earth's history, a species understands extinction while causing it. We know what living fossils are, we know how rare they are, we know what they represent. Ignorance is no longer an excuse. The question is not whether we can preserve them, but whether we choose to value long-term persistence over immediate advantage. In this sense, living fossils are not relics, they are judges. They ask a simple but devastating question. If life could survive asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, and global collapse, why can it not survive us? The answer, uncomfortably, may be that natural catastrophes end. Human-driven change does not, unless we decide it should, and yet there is still space for hope. The same intelligence that allows us to disrupt ecosystems also allows us to understand them. Conservation successes show that when pressure is reduced, life rebounds with astonishing speed. Ancient lineages can recover if given time and stability. The lesson of living fossils is not that change must stop, but that it must slow. Evolution thrives on patience. If we learn anything from these organisms, it is that endurance is not passive. It is active restraint, the refusal to exceed limits, the ability to exist without exhausting the system that sustains you. This is a lesson humanity has not yet mastered. As you reflect on these creatures, on the coelacanth moving through deep, ancient waters, on horseshoe crabs crawling along shorelines older than forests, consider what it means that they are still here, not because they were destined to survive, but because circumstances allowed them to. Circumstances we now control. Living fossils do not belong to the past. They belong to a future that depends on whether we understand their message. A message written not in words but in survival itself. They waited out the end of worlds. The question is whether we will allow them to wait out ours.